Tonight, 13,000 people descend on Westminster as the bell rings for Starmer versus the farmers, round one. Well, farmers and opposition politicians protest against the government's changes to inheritance tax, but one celebrity backer isn't confident of success.
Just a final message for the Prime Minister, if he's watching today from Rio.
He isn't, he's in Rio.
If he's watching...
He's watching, he's going la 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 la.
Well, the government says most farms won't be affected. We'll hear from the Prime Minister, who denies Labour is waging a class war. Also tonight, 1,000 days of war in Ukraine brings renewed support from the UK to Kyiv and a warning from Moscow of the threat of nuclear war. And shuttle diplomacy, Donald Trump prepares to attend a SpaceX launch with Elon Musk tonight, making him the latest politician to try and get some stardust from the space race. Bringing their own stardust this evening, Tim Montgomery and Emily Thornberry, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Jeremy Clarkson, the unlikeliest of farmers, is now the face of the rural rebellion against the budget. Farms worth £1 million or more will now be subject to inheritance tax of 20%. Now, farmers say this is going to hit two-thirds of farms, devastate family businesses, and even lead to food supply issues if farmers sell up or leave the industry. That's why thousands of them, including Jeremy Clarkson, marched on Parliament today demanding change. But the government say they got it all wrong. They say only around 500 of the very wealthiest of farms are going to be hit by this, and that the current situation is basically being used by some as a tax dodge, with the super rich buying up farmland to avoid inheritance tax. Who's right? We're going to try and find out on tonight's show, speaking to a farmer at the protest and also the man partly responsible for the policy, the Environment Secretary, Sophy Ridge. There is one other thing, though, because farmers were traditionally seen as Conservative voters. But, you know, after the election shake-up this year, there's an awful lot of Labour MPs sitting on some slender majorities in rural seats. You know, it may be that Labour would never have previously cared what Jeremy Clarkson thought of their policy. But at the last election, well, a hefty chunk of people who voted for them, well, they do care. Sky's Dan Whiteout has tonight's first report from the protests.
They came from all corners of the country. More than 10,000 farmers brought Whitehall to a standstill, hoping their message to overturn the new inheritance tax rule is heard loud and clear.
How do you feel about the government and this plan? Because Labour promised not to do this in the next election.
Did.
How do you feel?
It's disappointing, it's sad. We want to pay taxes, we're OK with that, but to impact us so greatly, and it's disappointing.
It just feels like a kick in the teeth.
You know, our job and our way of life is to feed people and to look after the environment. It's something we've been doing for years. So, that's all we want to do. We don't want to, empty the shelves, but if it comes to it, then that's what's going to happen.
Jeremy, what's your word to the government? Your life is done. Please back down.
He has become the celebrity voice for the sector. TV presenter come farmer Jeremy Clarkson, insisting the government needs to perform a U-turn.
For the sake of everybody here, and for all the farmers who are stuck at home today, paralysed by a fog of despair over what's been foisted upon them, I beg of the government to be big, to accept that this was rushed through, it wasn't thought out, and it's a mistake. That's the big thing to do, admit it, and back down.
Little chance of that happening. The government doubling down on its numbers, insisting there'll be no change in policy.
Assuming these projections from HMRC validated by the OBR and the IFS are correct, then many of them, probably happily, are wrong. Because there are things that they can do to plan their tax affairs, as most businesses or asset owners would do, to limit their liability. I mean, the numbers I've heard bandied around are enormous and very, 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 very frightening.
This is the biggest protest that farmers have held in years, and they say that if the government doesn't back down over this, they will be back, and it may not be as peaceful.
Farming strikes and further protests may be on the cards. They insist the next generation may not be able to take over for real if this budget proposal goes through. As they head back to the countryside, there's little sign of a clear road ahead. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Westminster.
Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, spoke to the Prime Minister at the G20 summit in Rio. We'll hear a bit later what he told her about Russia's threats of nuclear escalation 1,000 days on from that invasion of Ukraine. But I just want to start with what he told her about today's protests here at home.
Prime Minister, your budget's backfiring back home. Over 15,000 farmers descending on London angry at inheritance tax changes. You insist the tax only hits landowning couples once the 3 million threshold is hit. You think wealthy landowners need to pay more tax?
Well, I want to support farming. It's very important that we do so, and that's why in the budget we put down £5 billion over the next 2 years into farming, into food sustainability. That's the biggest sum of money that's ever been put into farming.
Landowners
so far as inheritance tax is concerned, in a typical case, as you rightly say, which is a family wanting to pass on to one of their children, so a classic case, that's a £3 million threshold.
But you think wealthy landowners should pay more tax?
Meeting the concern of the farmers, what I would say, and this is important, the vast majority, therefore, will be unaffected by this. Where people are over that threshold, that's a small number of cases, the tax is 20%, so half of what everybody else pays, and it's payable over 10 years. But I would also just add this, which is...
Do you think they should pay more tax?
Let me just add this, because I do think it's important. I grew up, obviously, in a rural area, and I know that in rural areas, in farming communities, they need good hospitals, they need good schools, and they need houses that people can afford. And that's what we invest in the budget.
So you think wealthy landowners need to pay more for public services? That's where you're at?
Well, over the £3 million threshold, then that's where we've said the balance is right to start paying at that lower rate of 20%.
In your tax decisions, you've targeted people who send their kids to private schools, people who earn income from assets, landowners, small business owners. There's a pattern here. Is it a class war for you?
No, absolutely not.
It's not a class war?
No, it's not. And let me just take one of those examples, which is the VAT on private schools. I do know that people watching this will save hard to send their child to a private school because they think that's the best thing for their child. But every single parent wants opportunity and aspiration for their child. And up until now, we haven't had the right number of teachers in basic subjects like maths, etc., in our state secondary schools. I'm not prepared to tolerate that for our state schools.
What's your message to wealthy people who thinks you are waging a class war against them? What's your message to them? Because that's how some people feel.
It isn't at all what we're doing. It's a balanced approach. We had to fill a black hole which was left by the last government. We had to make sure we stabilised our economy. And we've invested, and I think the vast majority of people know that we had to invest in our NHS, which was broken, in our schools to make sure every single child can go as far as their talent will take them, and in housing so that people can have a safe and secure roof over their head that they can afford, a sort of base camp for their dreams.
Well, Beth joins us now from Rio. Beth, you flew halfway across the world and yet still answering questions about this farmers' row. How difficult do you think it was for Keir Starmer today?
Well, Sophie, the first thing I'd say is at the end of the press conference of this summit, he stressed that he was here on the global stage trying to deliver for people back home. So I think it's a Prime Minister that's aware that while he's here in talks with China or talking about Ukraine, back home, thousands of people are protesting in Westminster against domestic policies. And look, he has got a difficult position at home. Point one, in that interview, I also asked him about anemic economic growth. The economy contracted in September, the first 3 months of the Labour government. That bounce back from recession slowing dramatically. He said it is not good enough. The growth figures are not good enough. And then look at the budget backlash. You've got it from the farmers. You also had it from retailers today, warning that thousands of retail jobs could be going because of the lift in employment insurance rates for employers for national insurance. So look, it's uncomfortable for the Prime Minister. And I think what we got in that interview is a bit more of a sense of where he's coming from, because where he has chosen to raise taxes has been on people who send their kids to private schools, businesses, people who earn income through assets, or in this case, landowners, people with farm estates worth over £3 million. He said he thinks he is striking the right balance. Later on in the interview, I said to him, look, what's the essence of what you're about? If you think of Thatcher as a Prime Minister who was all about enterprise, or Blair who was all about modernisation, what are you, Keir Starmer, about? And he said, my essence is that working people will be better off under my government. And I think what you're seeing now, what wasn't clear maybe before the election when they ran out that manifesto trying to get a hugely broad coalition of voters, what you're seeing now is a PM making choices about who has to pay more in order to fund better public services. And some of the wealthier people in society are coming off worse off. I guess what he would say about coming to a place like this, to Rio, where he's talking to leaders about trade. He talked about India and restarting trade talks, or, as I was saying, with President Xi of China, the second biggest trading partner we've got, trying to do more business there. He would say that that's all about delivering growth back home, but my goodness, he's got a challenge on to do that, and all the while his budget is unravelling in front of his eyes.
Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there, our political editor in Rio with the Prime Minister. Well, we've heard from Keir Starmer. Let's hear now from someone who attended the protest here in Westminster. Fergus Howie, he has a family farm in Essex. I joined him in a very slushy Parliament Square as the protest came to a close. So talk to me about your farm. I think it's a Wicks Manor farm. What is it that you produce?
So we're based in Essex, we're arable farmers. We own about 400 acres, which is my grandfather and my father bought over, well, grandfather came down in 1928, bought some land. My father added to that. So we're farming the land that my grandfather farmed, my father farmed. That is an inherited investment of about £24,000. So that has now been passed through from grandfather to my father and now to my brother and myself. We farm arable land, and we also have a pig business, and we also progressive farmers. We employ about 50 people, and we have a meat processing where we make bacon, ham, sausages, which we supply out to regional supermarkets, national food service, and we also export. So we're progressive, and we like. But this is the thing about farming: it's all about taking something which you inherit, making it hopefully bigger and better, and passing it to the next generation.
And you want to pass it down through the family. That's the aim, is it?
I like to say that our business has a lifespan of this, and my lifespan is that at the front of it.
Just talking to you about the budget, so the idea is that farms worth more than £1 million will have 20% inheritance tax on. Will your farm be impacted by that then?
We will. We own 400 acres, which is a reasonably small farm in Essex. That is worth about £10,000 an acre, about say 4 million. You get a £1 million which allowance, so we would be paying 20% on 3 million, £600,000.
So £600,000, that's what the budget is cost you?
That's what it would cost us, yes. But it's more than that, because my father still owns the land, because up until the 30th of October, the tax advice was for the farmers to keep the land, and then pass it down on death. So when he then passes to my brother and I, he has 7 years to live. Now, this is a tragedy for farmers in the UK, because loads of guys which are 70, 80-year-old have put all their life's effort into growing an asset, very limited cash coming into the business, as in what you can spend. Everything is ploughed back in. You draw a very small amount out to live off. Everything is reinvested to grow food for us as a nation and to grow an asset for the next generation.
What the government is saying, though, is that this is only going to impact a very small number of farms. You can hear Big Ben, that's probably, if that comes across, it shows we're right outside Parliament. Exactly. So what they're saying is that it's going to be around 500 farms in total impacted. That goes on HMRC figures of 462 farms being valued at over £1 million in 2022. So what would you say?
Sadly, the Treasury has misinformed the government, and the government have made decisions on inaccurate information. DEFRA, which is the farming body's governing body, say that it's 66%. Now, I would say that it's higher than that. Every single farm now, since this budget, now has a sword of Damocles holding over it.
But they must have the numbers. HMRC must have the numbers. You know, that they've looked at the 462 inherited farms. It's a specific number, right? So that must be right.
But it's incorrect. This is going to affect every single farm. £1 million is, and it sounds a lot of money for the general public, but that is one house and 20 acres. You can't farm that.
Can I ask if you accept that some people, and I'm not talking about the kind of farmers that you are, obviously, that, you know, give your everything to your farm and those families that do so as well, that some people are effectively using this as a bit of a tax dodge? You know, there is research, isn't there, that actually about 60% of farms bought recently were investors.
My grandfather bought land in 1920s at £30 an acre. My father bought land in 1960s at £60 an acre. Land is now worth £10,000 an acre. So from a farming point of view, you can't afford, straight farming cannot afford to buy it.
But some people, it feels, are using it as a tax dodge, right?
They are using it as a tax dodge, and the government, sadly, has set the thresholds far too low. In the same way they did with the winter fuel allowance, they have hit everybody when they didn't mean to hit everybody. They went into this, I'm sure, with good intentions, and from a farming point of view, if there was those people with £1 million of bonuses from London who go out and buy one house and 20 acres, hang on a minute, they're still immune from this, they're still within this threshold. But the farmer who's got 200 acres, struggling to farm, earning 0.5% under the minimum wage, working day and night, could only buy a new pair of overalls and a flat cap for himself, but he passes it to the next generation. He's done his job. He kept that farm and he passed it to the next generation. He's now clobbered.
Well, the farmers' protests sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the political commentator Benedict Spence and the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman. Let's chat to our duo for this evening, shall we? The Conservative commentator Tim Montgomery and the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Emily Thornberry. Great to have you both here. Emily, you've got quite a kind of central London constituency, North London constituency. You're saying that you've got one farm in there, a city farm, so perhaps not exactly the kind of farmers that we've been seeing on the protest today. But what is your view on this? Do you have sympathy with the farmers?
So I think the farmers have had a pretty hard time. I think that we're still getting over leaving the European Union. I think that's had a really big effect. I think that it's very difficult for farmers to export into Europe because we don't have the sort of agreement that we probably should do. And I think that there's been a terrible summer, and the promises that were made by the previous government by way of, you're going to lose the subsidies that you would have got if you'd remained in the European Union, but don't worry, we're going to give you better ones, never really materialised. So there's been kind of one thing after another. Trade deals, people being overlooked, the Australian trade deal, I know, upset farmers very much. So there's this feeling, I think, from farmers that Parliament, no matter who's in Parliament, is a long way away from them and their interests. So I understand all of that. But I think that perhaps people are just not listening to one another. Because I think that all that the government is saying is that there are too many people these days taking the mickey. There are too many people who are buying farms, claiming to be farmers, and they're obviously not. Farmer Beckham, no, he's a footballer. He doesn't, really. And the idea that he buys this, huge amount of land, is going to be able to pass it on to his children and not pay any tax on it because it's a farm and he's a farmer. No, really. And I think, some of the biggest farms and some of the biggest, there has to be a limit to it. Because until now, agricultural land has been able to be passed down through generations without any tax being paid. But, it's got to the stage now where 500 farms are worth a huge amount of money, and all that's being asked is that they pay tax.
What's your take on this? Do you agree with what Emily was saying there?
Well, farmers have had a difficult time, but they weren't protesting like they have been today at the end of the Conservative years. Something special has happened with this measure. And I don't understand farming, it's not my world, but I'm incredibly struck by the unity and vehemence of farmers. They really feel that this is an injustice. And, Del Vince, the Labour donor, was tweeting earlier that, I don't see why farmers should be treated any differently from anyone else. But farming is different. You know, the beautiful English countryside has been maintained by our farmers. They do pass it on from generation to generation more than any other kind of profession, or the environmental responsibilities that the world market, and it's a very unusual business, and I think we sort of meddle with it at our peril. And my general point, I think, would be maybe Labour aren't doing all this with the best of intentions, but I do understand the business world, and the impact of their NI increase on business is really negative. And I wonder whether there's a pattern here of a government which really doesn't have experience of the business world or the farming world. Too many people involved in politics. It's just not really understanding the implications of what they're doing. And I think the public would respect if there's a bit of admission, we probably went too far, the government say that, and change now before digging your heels in for too long.
I mean, is there an argument? What would you... Because I think most people would agree that, look, people taking the mickey, people using this as effectively a tax dodge is out of order.
Yeah.
But is there, like, a mitigation? I mean, we heard from some of the farmers there saying that, the threshold should be raised. What would you say?
See, I think that, actually, if a couple pass on a farm, then it isn't $1 million, it's 3 million. So it's a bit more complicated than it seems to be at the first. And I think the farmer that you were talking to, was conceding that if land is passed to a younger generation before the father or the mother farmer dies, then there isn't tax to be paid on that.
So they need better tax planning.
So there needs to be better tax planning, of course. But as I say, the principle is that there is a lot of land being bought up by people who don't have the best interests of farming at heart, are not actually necessarily interested in farming, they're interested in avoiding tax. And I mean, they're crowding out, bona fide farmers out of the market who might well want to buy that land themselves.
The trouble is, rich farmers, and we know what people are like with accountants. I suspect what will happen is those people that perhaps the law is trying to target, they'll still not pay tax. It'll be those people who... I don't plan taxes. Most people don't, do that. They don't have the accountants to manage these things. And the danger is, and actually the Labour minister on Times Radio earlier today saying, well, you can always organise your affairs so you don't have to pay tax again. So, it seems like if you've got an accountant, you're going to be OK. If you don't, you're going to be taxed.
Steve Reid, we do talk about that a little bit in an interview we'll hear later on as well. Great to have you both on the programme. Good to hear your initial thoughts as well. We'll have lots more from Tim and Emily coming up. You're watching the Politics Hub. Sticking with the farmers' protests, I'm going to get the reaction from the Environment Secretary, Steve Reid. That's next.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, okay?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free, wherever you get your news. This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hans is a highly trained police dog. The force is incredible. It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
We arrive. a secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, as we've been discussing, thousands of farmers have descended on Westminster today to protest the government's changes to the rules around inheritance tax. Now, this is one of those policies where you can listen to both sides and wonder whether they're really talking about the same thing. Our business and economics correspondent Paul Kelsay has been taking a look at what's really going on.
Nobody likes inheritance tax, but until now, farmers haven't had to worry about it. That's because they've enjoyed 100% tax relief under two categories. Agricultural property relief, covering land and farm buildings, and business property relief. That covers crops, livestock, machinery, farm shops and the like. The problem, if you're the Treasury, is 100% relief attracts people who want to shelter their wealth, and that's affected who's buying farms. This chart shows us what category of people are buying farms. Look at the first 3 quarters of this year. Just 30% here was bought by actual farmers. The rest is going to lifestyle farmers, think Jeremy Clarkson, private investors and institutional investors. Now, the government says sheltering wealth this way is unfair and unsustainable, so they're changing the rules. Instead of 100% relief, it will be limited. Now, every individual farmer will have £1 million of inheritance tax relief. That rises to £1.5 million once you add the normal personal reliefs that everybody gets. Could be £3 million if there's a couple passing on a farm. But above that, wherever you are on that scale, you will face a bill. How many farmers will be affected is the key question. The government likes these numbers. Agricultural property relief, we're interested in the estates that are worth more than £1 million, so could be above those thresholds. Just 462, says the Prime Minister. That's not too bad, doesn't sound too bad. It doesn't include the business reliefs, and the National Farmers Union say the problem for them is much, much bigger. And they like these numbers from DEFRA, the Department of the Environment. These are farms, proportion by value, 10% worth less than £250,000. But just look at this. The government's own numbers, 49% of farms worth more than £1.5 million. That means they could be facing a tax bill. How do they pay for it? Farms are asset rich, but they're cash poor. This shows us just how cash poor. Average profits for croppable farms, arable and horticulture, look in the last financial year, they've halved and they're less than £50,000. Even with 10 years to pay off an inheritance tax bill of, say, £1 million, that's £100,000 a year. Your profit doesn't even get halfway. So perhaps the real question here is not, is inheritance tax fair for farmers? It's how do we make farming pay?
That is the big question, certainly posed there by Paul Kelsay. Well, earlier I spoke to the Environment Secretary, Steve Reed. Let's have a listen. Hello, great to have you on the programme.
Good to be here
today.
Sophie.
Well, it's been a busy day. Thousands of protesters coming to Westminster. Did you manage to get out and meet them?
I did meet some farmers who came in. I spent 2 hours in front of a select committee, but I spoke to some farmers before I went into that. Of course I did. And, you know, I can understand why people are worried about change, but the point I was making to these farmers is this is a government that is backing British farming. Despite the very difficult circumstances of the budget, we allocated £5 billion over the next 2 years for farming. That's the biggest ever budget in the country's history for sustainable farming. Now, on the changes that we're making to inheritance tax, that is in the context of a £22 billion black hole in the public finances that we've had to fill. And also, we've had to fund our public services that are on their knees, services like the NHS that farmers use. Now, in order to do that, we've had to ask the wealthiest individuals and the very largest farms to pay their fair share. But if you look at the numbers about who will be affected, and this is the key point, the Treasury numbers taken from HMRC, validated by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, show that no more than 500 farms would be affected in any year. The vast majority of farmers or claimants at the point of death would pay nothing.
I want to talk in depth about the figures in a moment, because I feel like this is kind of the crux of the argument, if you like. But before I do, I just want to play you a clip of what Jeremy Clarkson, obviously the face of the protest, if you like, told my colleague Sarah Jane Mee a little earlier. I think you can just have a listen.
What do you want to say to the government about what's happening to farmers with the inheritance tax?
Back down.
Keep moving, please,
Back
guys.
down.
Keep moving.
You know, if you make a mistake, we all do,
and they have, be big enough to say, we made a mistake here, and then back down.
Are you going to back down?
Well, I love Jeremy Clarkson's show, but I think he's listening to the wrong data here. If the vast majority of farmers are not affected, only 500 according to this data, and that's based on the last year for which we had actual hard data for claims. Because it shows that 3/4 of claimants will pay nothing.
So I went and I spoke to farmers, and I put that to them today when I went out to meet some farmers on the protest, and they said, look, if you look at DEFRA's own figures, they say 2/3 of farms are worth over £1 million, so they will be impacted by this. They basically think you've just swallowed the Treasury line.
But the calculation doesn't work like that, because more than one person can own a farm and they each get a £1 million threshold, plus if they're a couple, the million that they can pass on to their children. For many people, that's 3 million already, without taking into account other allowances like capital rollover allowances that would be available to them.
Partner and then pass it to their children afterwards.
You're asking people don't you? You tax plan and you make sure that you reduce your liability. So many people will get. Many people.
A lot of people.
Businesses do that.
Can I just? Because I think this is also quite interesting. You know, a lot of people would say, you know, asking people to find ways to avoid paying tax is not what the government should be doing.
It's not avoiding it.
A lot of people don't have
It's
tax
succession planning that any business would do, and any business has an accountant. Farms are businesses; they have accountants as well. But as I was saying, in many cases they'll get £3 million tax-free anyway. So it will only be the bigger farms and the wealthiest individuals that will be paying this. But even when they pay it, they're paying half the rate of inheritance tax that anyone else would have to pay. And instead of paying it all at once, like any other taxpayer, they'll have 10 years to phase it over. That's still a very good deal for some of our wealthiest landowners and biggest farms. Now,
do you think the farmers just don't really understand this policy?
I think the farmers have been told things that have alarmed them. Part of my job is to show them why the figures that we are using are reliable. Now, what we've done is we've got those figures based on hard data, actual claims on point of death from the last year that those figures were available. It's been validated by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, the independent IFS financial think tank. They're all saying exactly the same thing.
So you effectively know farm by farm almost who would be liable to this.
Well,
could you publish that data so then people would, because there is a lot of alarm and fear.
No.
Are you thinking about publishing the data so people can?
That data is available. It's available on the DEFRA website.
But what I mean is, like, so you can check to see if you are one of the farms. You know, if you've got 462
you can't publish it to that level
farms.
of detail because circumstances will change. How many people own the farm? What other capital allowances they're entitled to? Whether they have a mortgage, the type of other property that they own. It varies from circumstance to circumstance.
You're saying 500. It's pretty specific, isn't it?
But that's based on the data for an entire year that would have had all of that complexity within it, rolled forwards, and then that gives you the 500 figure. But as I'm saying, it's not just HMRC and the Treasury. The OBR, Office for Budget Responsibility, have independently verified it. So have the IFS.
Have you done any contingency planning about what would happen if farmers did sell up or leave the industry as a result of this, and whether it could affect the food supply?
Well, they won't be selling up and leaving the industry because the vast majority of them won't be affected.
Have you done any contingency planning?
Well, the vast majority won't be affected, so that won't be happening.
So is that no, you haven't done, or?
Well, there's no need. If most of them aren't going to be affected, why would they be leaving the industry? Last year, the majority of agricultural land that came up for sale went to non-farmers. And we think a lot of that is people, very wealthy individuals from non-farming backgrounds, buying up agricultural land because they know that way they can avoid their own inheritance tax liability. Now, that was not what this scheme was originally put together for. By dealing with it, we get a fair contribution from the very wealthiest and biggest farms, but we can also stop wealthy individuals from outside farming buying up land and escalating the prices that lock younger farmers out of the dream of owning their own farm.
So you're doing this partly because it's the right thing to do?
It's the right thing to do, but I think it helps farmers as well. And in the context of a government that, despite all of the difficult financial inheritance, has allocated £5 billion to back farming over the next 2 years, trying to negotiate a new deal to get British food exports moving across the channel again. This is a government on farmers' side.
My interview there with Sophy Ridge just a few moments before coming on air this evening. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. As Donald Trump gears up to attend a SpaceX launch with his political ally Elon Musk, We'll discuss what happens when the worlds of space and politics collide. But up next, on the 1000th day of war in Ukraine, tensions rise between Russia and the West as the Kremlin warns of nuclear escalation. Hello, welcome back. You're watching The Politics Hub. Well, today is 1,000 days since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And that landmark comes at a pivotal moment in the conflict as well. Russia said that its Bryansk region was targeted by US-supplied long-range missiles. That's days after President Biden lifted restrictions on their use for Ukraine. Well, President Putin today heightened tensions further by signing a doctrine which lowers the threshold for Moscow's use of nuclear weapons. Well, the government and opposition here in the UK used today to signal their united front in support of Ukraine. The Defence and the Shadow Defence Secretary, as you can see there, visiting a Ukrainian cathedral. John Healey also announced more money for attack and surveillance drones. And the Prime Minister, speaking at the G20, said that President Putin is the author of his own exile.
One nation stands apart. For the third year running, Putin did not attend this summit. He is the author of his own exile. And on day 1,000 of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, I say again, end the war, get out of Ukraine.
Well, we heard Simon Beth's interview with the Prime Minister earlier on. She also asked him about the latest developments in Ukraine.
Prime Minister, the Ukraine-Russia war has been raging for 1,000 days. Ukraine wants to end the war. Russia confirms 6 long-range US missiles have now been fired into their territory. Is this a game changer? And have you discussed ending this war with Donald Trump?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's day 1,000 of this conflict. That's 1,000 days of Russian aggression, 1,000 days of sacrifice by Ukraine. It's impacted the rest of the world, including the United Kingdom. I've been clear throughout those 1,000 days that we must give the Ukraine the support that is needed for as long as it's needed. That's something I've doubled down on here at G20 and in recent weeks. The simplest way to end this conflict is for Russia to stop the aggression.
And the missiles a game changer?
Well, I'm not going to comment.
It's been confirmed. It's been confirmed by Russia that they have landed in their territory.
Beth, you will understand. I'm not going to comment on operational details.
In principle, are the missiles a game changer? In principle.
The reason that I'm not going to comment is, I think, well understood, which is Putin is the winner if we do so, and it will undermine Ukraine, and I'm not prepared to do that.
Just quickly, Russia's also threatened nuclear escalation. Are you comfortable with that when people at home are watching this, worrying that you could put us at risk?
Well, it's very important. It's very important that we're steadfast in our support for Ukraine. Russia is the aggressor,
Even if
Russia
unleashes nuclear war.
Russia has to be the one that makes the move to stop this war. It's within their gift, but we must support Ukraine. It's impacting not just Ukraine; it's impacting the rest of the world, including the UK.
Is your message to viewers back home that there will not be a nuclear war, because that is what Russia is threatening?
My message is that we need to ensure that Ukraine is put in the best possible position. This is 1,000 days of conflict, and there is a very high cost if Russian aggression is seen to pay off, a cost that we will all pay, because this is not just about sovereignty in Ukraine. It's about our freedoms, it's about our way of life, and it impacts everybody across the United Kingdom. But, you know, we are working, of course, with allies to make sure Ukraine is in the best possible position.
Well, let's bring in our duo for tonight, shall we? Tim and Emily, lots to talk about, as Emily was just showing. But so much to discuss on this. Look, it feels to me like the kind of Ukraine war has been in this kind of grinding freeze for a while, and now suddenly things are moving. It's very unpredictable, whether that's on the diplomatic side, on the military side as well, and that's obviously worrying, because unpredictability is when people kind of worry the most, right? The point of maximum danger. Emily, what's your reflections on where we are?
So I think the thing is that without a doubt, I don't have any doubt, the Ukrainians are fighting a war on behalf of us all. And what I was just saying during the break was talking about some of the people that I've met recently. I met the Estonian foreign minister, who pointed out that it's only a couple of 100 kilometres away that there are troops from northern Korea fighting in Europe. You know, I mean, literally, I mean, just really nearby. Yeah. I met Moldovans who were saying last night there were Russian missiles going overhead. Now, you know, that's not Britain, but they are Europeans, they are our neighbours, they are very close to us, and an empowered Putin in Kyiv, thinking that the world is his oyster, would be a very, I mean, it's a frightening place now, but it'd be an even more frightening place if he felt that he could, where would he stop? And that's obviously great concern to the Georgians and the Moldovans, but it could, you know, carry on. And there's this constant testing of NATO. And what does NATO mean? So, you know, so they will do little. They will make little encroachments. They will keep going. They will do a different, new type of warfare, whereby, you know, the banks will stop working. All that sort of thing. You know, the new type of warfare, and saying, go on then. So you're NATO. What are you going to do about that? And just keep pushing it and pushing it. And obviously, the concern is that we also, at the same time, we have a president of the United States about to be sworn in, who has a history of not being exactly enthusiastic about NATO.
Yes, this is a good point on NATO. You mentioned Donald Trump there, and I think there are kind of two sort of schools of thought. People who think that he's an appeaser to a man who you cannot appease, Putin, and others who think in war there has to be some kind of compromise, and if Donald Trump can find a way of getting an off-ramp for Russia, that's a good thing. Tim, I don't know where you fall on this.
Well, actually, if you look at what Trump did in office rather than what he said, sometimes there's a gap. And actually, under his presidency, America actually had tougher sanctions against Moscow than under the Democrats, partly because of the way he worked with Congress. But look, I agree with everything Emily said, but it's not the full story. At the moment, on our own continent, estimates suggest that 1,000 young lives, Russian and Ukrainian, are either ending or being severely every single day. Every single day. And sometimes it's not even in the news. I think what Putin has done is evil, indefensible. But we're potentially in a World War I scenario with a forever war. There is no evidence Ukraine has been able to take serious amounts of territory. Russia isn't able to make big advances because of the defence arms we've rightly given them. Something has to change. Something has to change. And I think what Donald Trump might do, this is what I hope he will do, he will bring these people to the negotiation, end this war. There'll be compromise on both sides. But if Putin doesn't play, I hope he'll do what Biden has never done, which is supply arms properly, on time and on scale, so that there's a much bigger downside for Putin if he does think this can carry on.
So, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but the question is, right, if Donald Trump does decide to make a peace within, he said he could do it within a day or before he was inaugurated or whatever rhetoric he's used, the concern is that unless that's properly thought through, it could look like capitulation. It could look like defeat. It could look like putting up the white flag to Putin. Now, is that what Donald Trump wants to be? He wants to be somebody who loses, because I don't think that he is. And losing looks like, I think, not letting the Ukrainians take the lead on this, because they're the ones who are losing the people. And it's their country that's been invaded and their country that's been attacked. So the worry is that, from the Ukrainians that I've spoken to, their concern is that their people will try and talk over their heads and make a deal without them being properly involved. And then also, what does the deal look like? I mean, leaving aside kind of handing over bits of Ukrainian land, which obviously is bad enough, but actually the real problem will be, what will the status of Ukraine be afterwards? Will it be somewhere that will be forced to be not allowed to join NATO, not allowed to join the European Union, be so-called neutral, which will really mean remaining in the orbit of Russia, and then Putin would have won?
I could honestly talk about this with you two for so much longer, because there are so many different things to consider. It's a very, very difficult thing to grapple with, but thank you both very much indeed. I just want to bring you now the final instalment of our interview with the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who told political editor Beth Rigby about his disappointment at what he called the sluggish growth of the UK economy, and he delivered what sounded a little bit like a veiled warning to his own health secretary not to intervene in the assisted dying debate.
You've repeatedly said raising economic growth is your number one priority, yet in the first 3 months of your government, the economy's barely grown and it actually contracted in September. You must be pretty gutted by that.
Well, I want those figures to improve.
They're not good enough, are they?
They're not good enough, and I want them to improve. I think the best way of turbocharging that is to get the inward investment into our country, and I'm really pleased that our investment summit brought in £63 billion. That's measured in jobs in different parts of the country, but do we want that to improve? Do I want those figures to improve? Yes, of course I do.
OK, Prime Minister, just quickly, in 2015 you supported the assisted dying bill. Do you feel torn on it now?
Look, I do know that there are very strong feelings on this, which is why I've been clear it's a free vote and MPs must decide for themselves. I prosecuted and looked at every single case over 5 years, every investigation. I know it's deeply held, and this is not a party political issue. MPs will have to decide for themselves.
Your Health Secretary ordered a review into the potential implications for NHS services. This isn't about money, though, is it? It's not about money, this decision, is it?
This is about a deeply held belief on sort of both sides of the argument, if you like. When I was Chief Prosecutor, we did the biggest consultation ever in criminal justice, and I saw for myself how important it is.
So why is your Health Secretary turning it into an argument about money, and should he be doing that?
Look, I don't think pressure should be put on MPs about how they vote.
So you don't think he should have done that?
I think we need to stay neutral. I'm not going to talk about individual members of the Cabinet.
Have you spoken to him about it?
I've spoken to all of the Cabinet all of the time.
Including West Streeting?
I talk to the Cabinet all of the time, as you'd expect. But the most important thing is when that vote comes up, MPs know that it's a free vote, it's not party political, and I will respect whatever way people vote, because I do understand just how deeply felt it is.
Keir Starmer there speaking to Beth Rigby. Emily, I did just want to ask you, because I know, look, as you know, the Prime Minister was saying, people grappling with this across the parliamentary divide. What's your current feeling on it?
So my gut instinct is I would want to be able to have the option, and I don't want to take that away from other people. But my problem is that palliative care in this country is, I mean, there are some great places, but it's not available to everybody. And I do think that most people would want to be able to die at home, pain-free, so that at 3 o'clock in the morning, if they need help, there will be someone there. And that is just not available. Most people die in hospital in far from ideal circumstances at the moment. I just think that the conversation ought to be about all of that, and it isn't at the moment. And my concern might be that if this bill was to pass, we might bypass a really important debate about what do we do about palliative care.
Some really big questions. Thank you very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Elon Musk remains in Donald Trump's orbit, with the president-elect set to attend the launch of SpaceX's Starship. We're going to be taking a look at the power of outer space diplomacy. That is next.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail.
The people here are praying quietly to themselves.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. Now they're trying to finish the job off so that they can move into the square.
Okay, it's okay, don't worry, it's okay.
They're becoming very sensitive about having the media around.
They have no protective masks or protective equipment at all.
We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Every time they touch them, they spray.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients, made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Perilously close to the vineyards.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, this evening we'll see the latest test flight for Elon Musk's SpaceX rocket, given an added twist by the news that Donald Trump is scheduled to be in attendance. Well, Mr. Trump obviously there to support the man to whom he gave a job in his administration. But since the dawn of the Cold War space race between the US and the Soviet Union, space exploration has always had one foot in the stars and the other very firmly in the world of politics.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
All the people on this earth are truly one in their pride in what you have done.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them.
Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our Space Shuttle Columbia.
They have managed to get the spacecraft on the southern part of the moon, which no other country has achieved so far.
With my signature today, you will witness the birth of the Space Force.
Oh, wow, that footage was extraordinary, wasn't it? We will have coverage of that SpaceX test flight with President-elect Donald Trump watching on live from 9:30 p.m. So 9:30 p.m. we're going to have coverage of that SpaceX test flight. There is something about space, isn't there? About humans exploring the final frontiers, and then, of course, I mean, as that great film showed, like wrapped up in the politics as well. What is it about politics and space, Tim?
Oh, I think it's a frontier we haven't properly explored yet, which I think interests us. But I think also very much the case is that our innovation to get into space produces so many unexpected benefits that affect all of our lives, and they contribute a lot to military technology as well. And I think one of the reasons why it's incredibly important we keep involved in this race is, you saw from the clip, China and India are investing in this. And I've been very fortunate in my life, I think all of us have been. The West, the good guys, has had military and technological superiority during the time we've lived. We don't want that to change, and part of ensuring that the good guys keep ahead of the race is we invest in space and get the benefits of technology, etc., so that we, continue to defend our democracy.
What do you reckon, Emily?
I remember when I was a child seeing, the rockets going up, the Russian rockets, and then the American rockets, and it was all very exciting. But I remember being told by adults that actually what was going on was that the Americans and Russians were spending all their money doing this instead of fighting each other, and that perhaps that was a good thing.
Maybe that's true, actually. No money for the actual rockets if you're spending it on the space rockets, which has got to be a good thing as well. There is something about it, though, isn't there? Definitely. And although I'm very aware of all the kind of junk we're leaving into space as well, I kind of think we've got a responsibility for it as well. Let's just kind of stick our chaos to this planet if we can. And thanks both very much indeed. It was great to have you both on the panel this evening. That is it from us tonight. But of course, do tune in to see the launch of that SpaceX rocket. It is bound to be exciting, eventful, I'm sure, and that is just the people in attendance. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee, and obviously Sarah Jane's been out and about interviewing Jeremy Clarkson, so definitely worth a watch just after the short break. I'll see you tomorrow.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
the government digs in on inheritance tax as farmers gather in Westminster. More than 10,000 descended on Whitehall today, saying plans to impose a tax on farms will cripple the countryside. The government insists the vast majority of farms won't be affected. That's disputed by farmers that include Jeremy Clarkson, who says ministers must admit they've got this wrong and back down.
A message for the Prime Minister if he's